Hello, everybody, and welcome to Magus of the Brew number 2, the podcast where we go over contrived combo decks in Commander and crack open cold ones at the same time. Today's cold one is the Firestone Walker Brewery Nitro Merlin Milk Stout. And today's commander is Jhoira Weatherlight Captain. Now, since everybody decided to build cereal-based breakfast decks, we're doing something similar, but not quite the same. So I got my cereal, and I got my milk stout. You know, it's not that bad. The deck, not the cereal. I had burial for breakfast every day. So as you may remember, when Dominaria first got spoiled, it was an accidental spoil on account of some Chinese leaks or mishap or something. And when we first got the cards, we only had the just the text on the cards, like the cost and what they did, pretty much. We didn't even have the pictures. And I think that is when me and a lot of people, I think everybody noticed Jhoira. I mean, admittedly, there's a little bit of nostalgia for me when I first actually started playing Commander, back when it was still EDH. One of my good friends at the time played Jhoira of the Gitu, the Suspend Jhoira. And the deck was pretty crazy. I mean, this was back when Emrakul the Eon's Torn was still in the format, so you would potentially be suspending Emrakul on like turn 2 or something, and then clock spinning it out and casting it, taking the extra turn and start annihilating, and it was really hard to keep up with if it had that like super good start. And you know, at that time, I played with Emrakul in my deck. I played Captain Sese, and that deck kind of just was based on slowing down the game with Gadok Teague and other cards, and then using Gaia's Cradle to generate a ton of mana, and then Mikakoro to sacrifice things. And what you would do is you search out Emrakul, cast it, take your extra turn, swing with Emrakul, sacrifice it to Mikakoro. I think you gain like 15 life or something when you do that anyways, but then you search it back out with Captain Sese and recast it. And it was a loop. It was a different time. So I think ultimately Emrakul being banned is probably healthy. But so going on to the new Jhoira. Jhoira is a cost 2 and is a red and a blue. It's a 3/3 human artificer. And whenever you cast a historic spell, draw a card. And historic spells are artifacts, legendaries, and sagas. And I think a lot of people, if you look at like pretty much any deck list online right now, you see these various Cheerios builds. And Cheerios is, as far as I know, is just based off a legacy deck. At least that's when I first saw it, using like kobolds and just zero cost creatures or whatever, and then Glimpse of Nature, and I think Gaia's Cradle, from what I remember. And you know, that deck's cool, but I think everybody, admittedly, like I think, and I mean, I did the same thing, to be completely honest. When I first saw Jhoira, I was like, oh my god, I can cast Mana Crypt, I can cast Mox Diamond, Mox Opal, even the new Mox Amber, and draw a card. And like, so it was initially, I think everybody got really caught up in this idea that you can just start tearing through your deck, casting all these zero cost things. But then once you start doing a gatherer search on this, you start to realize that the amount of good zero cost artifacts is not very high. And I mean, I made a deck that ran like a quarter shield, that ran everything it could, just to keep going. And I think on that deck, what ends up happening is a lot of times you just get a really shitty hand of a bunch of really useless zero cost artifacts, and you have like no way of protecting it because you have to have such a high density of zero cost or cheap artifacts that when you can't really play, like, you don't have very many room for counters because you have to make sure that you're like continue to, like, you actually go off. And the deck was, I mean, sometimes it like worked really cool, and then a lot of times it would just fizzle and be kind of awful. And then I think a lot of people, including myself, moved into the next category of using cost reducers. Helm of Awakening is one, Ethereum Sculptor, Semblance Anvil, Herald of Kozilek, actually. There's probably more, but I think those are ones off the top of my head. And a lot of people moved into doing it that way. And that way is a little bit better, but you're still like, you're running like a lot of density of useless artifacts just to continue these draws. And I mean, you run into a lot of weird things like in a game. Like, let's say your opening hand has a Mana Crypt. Do you cast Mana Crypt on turn 1 to get out Jhoira faster, or do you sandbag the Mana Crypt knowing that you'll get a draw off it later? And I mean, typically in my experience too, is you had to play Jhoira out and then wait a turn so you untap so you have mana free, and then you could try to go off. And that's pretty, I mean, depending on your play group or your play style or whatever, it can be kind of reckless to just leave your commander out there for a whole turn. So everybody knows what you're doing with it. Like, oh, okay, he's going to untap and then try to draw a bunch of stuff. So ultimately, I had to abandon those decks. And I mean, they're very popular right now, but I think that over time, that Jhoira Cheerios deck is just going to be dead. You won't see people play it anymore. It's just not, I don't think it's what we thought it was going to be. It was like too good to be true, I guess, apparently. So my deck is slightly different. This one functions by generating infinite mana and then using Ancestral Statue. The cons block costs 4 Golem. I think it's a 3/4, but that's irrelevant. And its text reads, when it enters the battlefield, you may return a non-land permanent you control to its owner's hand. So what you do is once you have infinite mana, you can actually just cast your Ancestral Statue and then return it back to your hand. And then recast it, because you can do this as many times as you want. And then with Jhoira out, obviously you already have infinite mana, so you can just cast Jhoira after. And then, before you start to go off. Doesn't really matter. And you can draw your whole deck. Now, don't actually draw your whole deck. You can, but if you were to draw your whole deck and you're like, I have infinite mana, I'm going to cast Walking Ballista, you'd actually lose. Just because of her ability is not a May ability, so it's a little tricky. But just draw what you need to, whatever you think you need. But yeah, so we have a few different ways of generating infinite mana. We have a Power Artifact, and then Grim Monolith and Basalt Monolith. The Monoliths both tap for mana and then untap for a cost. Power Artifact reduces the cost. It's pretty obvious. Generates infinite colorless mana relatively quickly. It's a low cost thing. And then we run Isochron Scepter and Dramatic Reversal. Is another way, just twiddles all your rocks that you have out. Because we do play we play as many rocks as is reasonable to do so. Any ones that are good. And then we play Omniscience. Omniscience actually does not generate infinite mana, but it makes everything free. And we can get it out early with Show and Tell on potentially turn 1. That'd be the ultimate god hand in this deck, I guess, would be a land, a Mana Crypt, Show and Tell, Omniscience, and Ancestral Statue. So 5 card, turn 1 win. So that's kind of cool, I guess. And then win-con wise, we have Aetherflux Reservoir. Just as you're drawing into it, the amount of storm you'll have off Ancestral Statue will be more than enough to just Death Star the whole table. Walking Ballista, just because if you're generating infinite mana, you can just play Ballista and machine gun everybody. And then Blue Sun Zenith as the other win con, which is draws. Well, you can use it on yourself to draw a bunch of cards, I guess, if you want to, but that's unnecessary. You just deck out all your opponents, just make them draw their whole libraries. Because it shuffles back in, so you get to reuse. You get to use it again. And then a slight other combo that we do use is the, in conjunction with the Scepter Dramatic Reversal, is since we also play Swan Song and Copy Artifact, there's a tricky combo here, actually. And those cards are just, if you ever, a lot of the deck lists I build, these are very common cards just to throw in, because Swan Song is a really good counter, and Copy Artifact, I mean, you can hit Blightsteel Colossus or something sometimes. So it's like a very, you don't have to really commit any more cards than you would want to for this combo. So this one just works by, you have Isochron Scepter with Dramatic Reversal on the table, and you have Copy Artifact copying Isochron Scepter and printing Swan Song. So what you do is you cast a spell, any spell that is counterable, that Swan Song can counter. And then you use the second Isochron Scepter to cast Swan Song, targeting the whatever spell you cast. It doesn't matter what the spell is. It just has to be anything that's counterable. And then you hold priority. Holding priority is just when you, normally like when you cast a spell, it goes around the table and then it resolves. Holding priority is just you responding to your own spells. Your opponents will still get a chance to respond to this. You can't just do this forever. It doesn't make your stuff automatically resolve or something. It's just you're responding first and then it goes around. So you hold priority, and then cast Dramatic Reversal off the second scepter to untap everything. And then you reuse the Ice Crown Scepter with Swan Song on it, targeting your first Swan Song. Now you let that resolve, and you get a Swan token. Then once that's resolved and things are still on the stack, you reuse the Dramatic Reversal to untap both scepters, and then the original spell like stays on the stack, and then you can just kind of repeat this and keep countering it, and then you end up with infinite Swan tokens. It's a crafty little combo that's compact and easy to run. Beyond that, the deck runs it's mostly things you would expect. We have about 11 counter spells in the deck. I am running Baral, and I don't know if there's enough density of counter spells. I mean, he does draw you a card off Jhoira, so that's good. But the counter spells we run, like Mana Drain, Force of Will, Dispel, Red Elemental Blast, Pyroblast, Mental Misstep. It's the only counter spells that you would kind of expect in a mono or a blue-red deck. And then we do, because of on account of Jhoira's ability, we do run a good amount of at least a few like Hose or Hate artifact cards. There's like really powerful stuff, like Grafdigger's Cage, very good graveyard hate. Cursed Totem, it's like Cursed Totem probably shuts down like probably 95% of the decks I built. It's a little wild. There's a little bit of a Nombo issue though with Cursed Totem and Walking Ballista, but that's kind of for the most part irrelevant. It'd have to be a very specific scenario where you want to cast Walking Ballista, but you have Cursed Totem out. I mean, most likely you could win a different way. But so I have to mention the Nombo there. We also play Pithing Needle, just because it's kind of works the same way. It works the same way the Cursed Totem does, just not globally, just specifically, so you can hit a Thrasios or something that's gonna be scary. Meek Stone, just for it costs 1, very cheap artifact that has a big effect on the board. I mean, it can stop some creatures that are actually just tapping for mana if they have a power big enough that it can stop them, or anything bigger that's a little bit terrifying you want to get rid of. And then Relic of Progenitist, Sentinel Totem, and Tormod's Crypt are all, again, very cheap artifacts that kind of hose graveyards. So very powerful cards just to run because we can get free draws off them. So beyond that, the deck plays about 7 tutors, 1 counting Inventor's Fair, which is a land. But, Muddled the Mixture, Merchant Scroll, Mystical Tutor, Gamble. I'm a big fan. You like gambling. Fabricate, and War of Intention. That's the other one. Just to try to find like the combo pieces that you'll need to try to take the win away. And I mean, like this deck works that you're playing a good density of threatening cards, and then you can protect them mostly. And that was my issue ultimately with the Cheerios decks, is like they can't really protect themselves. So I guess we got dogs barking or something over there. So I'm gonna finish my beer, and y'all have a good one.